I just wanted to touch base with you all and kind of just wrap up the conversation that we had at the very end of last class that was about structuring your short ID answers and your essays for the final exam as compared with things that people succeeded at and struggled with on the midterm exam. So just talking about the final exam, one question that's been coming up a lot is how do we study, what's the best way to study for the essay portion of the exam? And something that I'm noticing in class is I think people are behind at least on the second half of the course's readings. So, at the very basic starting point, you need to have done all of the readings, because if you've done all the readings and taken notes, it shouldn't take you too long to find the necessary information. So in that respect, time shouldn't be an issue. I highly recommend doing like a one-page summary of each reading that contains key points, key examples, key arguments, and key phrases used by each author. I find that helpful. Some people just put tabs in the readings noting certain concepts, but however you do it and whatever your sort of your own study skills are, you should find a system that works for you for finding information quickly. So that said, the most important thing for your essay is to have one clear thesis statement and to have that clear thesis statement correspond with the question that was asked of you. So you need to identify which prompt you have chosen, and then before you start writing anything, come up with your thesis statement. You may start with your thesis statement, or you may start by spending 5 minutes going through your notes and saying, okay, I need to refresh myself on what so-and-so says about buzz. How am I going to write an essay about contemporary social movements and how they use buzz? So you're kind of reviewing your notes on that, and then you generate your thesis statement. So I'm suggesting, the thing about the difference between writing an essay for a timed exam and writing an essay where you have a week or two to write is that you don't have time to go through the editing process, right? So you need to sort of err on the side of over-clarity when you're writing the essay. So I'm encouraging you to use stock thesis phrases, such as, in this paper, I will argue blank. I will do that by showing, or you can make this more nuanced, X, Y, and Z. These may refer to 3 different authors and or concepts. By taking the time to craft a specific and strong thesis statement, you already have the organization for your paper, right? You've got 3 paragraphs, X, Y, and Z. You need to come up with clear transitions linking those points always back to your thesis argument. So that's the biggest tip I can give you, is to write overly clearly in a short timed essay, because you don't have time to go back and say, oh, that concept wasn't really written clearly. So we will keep touching upon this later, but I just wanted to take a couple minutes here at the start. Are there any quick questions or broad questions about the essays and or studying for the essay before we begin the presentations? No? Okay, we'll turn it over.
Thanks, Laura.
And again, we'll be covering a lot more of this in the review session. I just wanted to link to last class.
Is that Monday or Wednesday?
The review is going to be mainly on Wednesday, possibly some on Monday. Right, Christina?
Yeah.
Mainly Wednesday.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so today is what we call China Day. So we have 4 presentations related to the Chinese issue, and also by the Chinese students. I think one important lesson or things to learn from these presentations to see how it could be connected to our readings in the class. And we had propositions, we had hypotheses from our class, and how it applied to a different context and what the mechanism would change. And could people bring in more variables when we explain a Western hypothesis? So could we bring it, when we bring it to a China's case, would something be different, or the thesis will be totally changed because of the change of context? So the first one is by Ling Nan is our is in the class, and she's from maths, and it's about the political trust pattern and preference for the policy of redistribution in China. So it may make you think about a little bit about the thesis related to trust. We have Tocqueville, we have Putnam. So Putnam had some argument about how trust is related to government legitimacy and efficiency. So maybe you can bring that thesis into mind and to see how a Chinese case will kind of revise that kind of argument. So please go ahead.
Okay, so thank you so much for your house introduction. And today I'm going to discuss about the political trust pattern and the preference for redistribution, and especially in the case of China. And so here's the structure of this presentation. I will first discuss about why I think this issue is really important, and follow that I will discuss about my research design and the preliminary findings with the 6th wave of the World Value Survey, and then some limitation about my current research and also the implication of it. So first of all, why we should care about redistribution policy. This is highly related to maybe the first question of our midterm exam. It's about the impact of the globalization on the income gap. So Robert Lucas and Saskia Sassen both discuss about this issue, and they reach some seemingly controversial conclusions. But actually they are discussing this on the different scales and the mechanism, and actually they both hold true from different perspectives. And here I mainly look about the domestic income contrast. So when we turn to look at China, and among the world's 10 largest economies, China has the second highest Gini coefficient. And here's the map. Sorry, this may be a little bit ambiguous, and it's not the latest version. But we can say that we can see that there's a stark contrast between the coastal regions and also the inland regions. And it doesn't discuss deeply inside a specific city, but if we think about Beijing or Shanghai, we can see there's still a large income gap between the top income group and the so-called low-end laborers, which may include migrant workers and other occupations.
Sorry, so which region has higher inequality? Can you explain to us a little bit?
Sorry, this is basically the income gap. It's not income inequality.
Income gap.
It's basically
so
just
which region has
yeah. So the redistributive policy mainly refers to the policy that costs may be widely distributed, but benefits are narrowly concentrated. And the preference for redistribution are at the foundation of political economy and vary in systematic ways across different countries. And now we turn to look at why trust really matters. So in terms of economic growth, we can see that trust will promote economic growth because it will reduce the transaction cost and time cost, and will promote cooperation between different individuals or corporations. And in terms of the politics, the public's policy attitudes will influence the policy outputs, and the trust will promote civic engagement, and the civic engagement in turn will increase the legitimacy in the political system. So, and also the theory from this class also confirm why trust really matters. And as Yu Hao has just mentioned, the Tocqueville and the Putnam's theory about their interpretation of American democracy both examined why trust is one important component about the social fabric of civic engagement, which to some extent lays the foundation of American democracy. But also, as Putnam noted in his Making Democracy work, the trust pattern is really varied by regional context. So here I will mainly examine the distinctive pattern in China. And here's the puzzle. So in recent years have witnessed the coexistence of China's high economic growth and also the alarming trust issues, maybe regarding to the corruption and air quality and food safety and things like that. And also, ironically, tested by some survey data, there's also a really high level of political trust and also social trust. This is contradictory to the conventional wisdom that the authoritarian regime will undermine people's political trust. But actually, we may raise the question about whether the high level of trust really reveals real trust or people's just obedience to the regime. So in order to make sense about the patterns of trust, we better like distinguish into different aspects, and that is the independent variable that I will mainly discuss later in the research design. And so basically, this research will try to link the trust and the preference for redistribution. This is something called like political inference. I think this is like widely discussed across different disciplines like social psychology and maybe economics. And economists may prefer to like call it like behavioral economics or something. So it mainly is what people rely upon when they want to form a specific policy preference. And so in China, we don't have like a democratic election as some formal channel to help people to predict people's real preference. So scholars may tend to look at citizens' policy preference as their attitudes towards the politics as an indirect way to measure their political support. And my hypothesis is that political trust matters for preference for redistribution, but the preferences varied since it incurs different value costs among different cluster groups. And here's some limitation about the current research. So basically, it's mainly based on the U.S. or the Western European high welfare states, and there's scant research on the case of China. And so the methodology of this research design, I will use the data about World Value Survey, and also I will try to find more evidence from the CGSS and the CFPS. They are both like localized Chinese data that will help me to provide more evidence for my hypothesis. And here I just did some like preliminary examination with the World Value Survey. And after the cleaning data at the first step, there are only like 1,550 valid observations of China. So this is the overview of World Value Survey. It compiles national and individual level data, and it covers a lot of variety of topics, including the preference for redistribution and political behavior. And the sixth wave is conducted through 2010 and 2014. So let me come to the design. First of all, the model. So the dependent variable is the people's preference for redistribution. And I segregate it into three aspects, like people's preference for income equality, for government responsibility, and for competition or egalitarianism. So the third mainly discuss about what kind of city do you prefer to live in, whether to prioritize the competition or the egalitarianism. So here are three questions that directly examine people's preference to the three aspects I have just mentioned. Can take a look. Okay. And so regarding the most important part, that's the political trust pattern. This is just a tentative distinction between what we should talk about when we reach the topic of political trust. The first is what and how much they trust. In this aspect, I only calculate the mean of the political trust value. It's additive value about people's trust or the confidence towards army, police, court, central government, political party, so namely different kind of institutions that relate to the political regime. And the second aspect is how they trust. This regards to people's response pattern that is developed recently by a sociology professor in UBC and her PhD student. So I would say that if people give all the different institutions a really high level of trust, I will call them like compliant. And if they give like really low score for different institutions, I will call them as cynic. And otherwise, if there are some variation, that means they have like a really critical examination about different object of trust. I will call them as the critical truster. And thirdly, I will discuss about in what directions they trust. I didn't include this part to my examination about the world value survey data, because in the case of China, these are basically just missing part regarding their conservative or liberal distinction. So maybe I will find more evidence from the general social survey and CFPS data later. And I also control a lot of variables regarding the basic like demographic characteristics like gender, age, social class, income, and employment, and also some of their values. Here are some preliminary findings. So with the sixth wave of the Chinese data, we can find that compliant mainly take up about 40% about the total population, and cynic take up only 2.1%, and the critical truster may take up about nearly 60%. And the chart below mainly refers to the highest percentage of the compliant cynics and the critical trusters by country and year. And we can see here like the global mean about the percentage of compliance is only like 8%, but China is actually 40%. And the mean of the critical truster is only like 7%, but China is already like 57.4%. And so here's the linkage between the political trust pattern and the redistribution. We can see that there's a significance. I don't know whether it's clear at the back of the classroom, but we can see that the political trust means really plays an important role in shaping people's preference towards the income equality and government responsibility. And also the type of compliant is also statistically significant related to people's preference for government responsibility. And secondly, I will examine people's trust towards different institution and how this kind of trust will shape their preference for redistribution. And we can see that people's trust towards the police and courts have a relatively important role in people's preference towards the government responsibility, and people's trust towards the courts plays an important role towards their preference for egalitarian society. And also there are some control variables that is worth noting, like their employment status and income may play their role in shaping their preference, and their value towards whether hard work really matters or luck really matters is also highly related to the result about the preference for redistribution. And so here's some like key findings. So political trust is highly correlated to their preference for redistribution, and compliance may tend to be more supportive about redistributive policy. And income really matters, and attitudes on the hardworking or luck also play a role. And definitely there are also a lot of like limitations, and so theoretically I should better define the trust pattern and code more questions to make the trust pattern like more trustworthy and things like that. And second, methodologically, I think world value survey is really good for cross-national comparison, but in the case of China, we can see a lot of like missing data. So I better to do more like robustness check, like based on CGSS and CFPS data. And also I need to make the causal relationship more salient. And also there are other items that I should include in the value as the control variables, like the belief of pessimism, Confucianism, and also like traditional or post-materialism value and things like that. So, and there's also some directions for further research, like the regional disparity or some like how the age range influence their trust pattern, and how the trust pattern in turn may inform their dynamics about the policy preference. And also it has some like implication regarding like authoritarian regime resilience. As the China still enjoy a really high political trust, we can see this forms kind of part of the legitimacy of the current leadership, and which will explain the resilience about the whole Chinese culture and things like that. So here's the references. And so I'm really happy to share about my idea with you at this time, and to be honest, this is only still on the stage of planning, and I cannot like make really comprehensive and rigorous conclusion as Tong and Yuhao will discuss later about their own projects. But I'm really happy to gain some perspective from sociology from this class, as my major is political science. So that's it. And if you find the topics interesting,
Any questions for Lina?
So, sorry. Yeah. So I was just wondering, like the major data source would be the world like survey. What value survey you just mentioned?
I think the reason I do the preliminary research based on world value surveys is it already has a large set of data and really standardized question regarding this kind of issues. But in terms of the validity of the data, I think I'd better trust like CGSS and CFPS more. So, but I just want to like draw a pattern here and to get some like basic findings with it, and it's not the final project. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for the question.
And also WVS is highly recommended for this class.
That's
it's
true.
Included in syllabus.
Yeah.
So we're really glad to see how like people play with the data here.
Yeah, okay.
Any other questions? Okay. So yeah, so it's interesting to see this Linux project because usually we think of trust, we only think like trust for neighbors, trust for government, so these kind of different categories. But in this case, what we have is like trust for different government institution, court, local government, other like government institution, and how this level of trust, how different like category of trust will lead to different perception of political, leads to perception of policy. So it's like, and add some nuances to what we already have for in the Putman story, but like add more details to it or to categorize into it. Okay, so the second one is Chen is from our department, a first year sociology PhD, and he was in Professor Clark's class like 2 years ago. So that's maybe a project like was developed from that time. So it's about like the competition between Chinese local municipalities, right? And also like how it goes in terms of the welfare provision. So different cities trying to recruit talents, but it's like how would they do that? How would they do that? So go ahead.
All right. Thank you. Hello everyone. I'm first of all happy to be here. I mean, I know it's kind of like sudden Professor Clark asked me to be here. But I'm happy to share my own experience with everyone here. Oh, that's a lot of familiar physics which is good. But anyway, all right. So this is basically my master's thesis while I was in maths. It was done in 2015, and after like 3 years after I reviewed this like thesis, I was like, oh crap, it's like basically full of problems. But just briefly, I want to show like what I've done during like a 9-month program, first of all, and secondly, how like we can learn from Professor Clark's class, because I did learn a lot from it, and he gave me very useful and constructive suggestions. So, and you can see the topics about, in general, it's about like the social welfare policies in China and how it varies from cities to cities, and that is basically also my master's thesis, and I will show to you. So the first thing, the research question is very simple here. It's basically just like the municipal variations within China. Like, because everyone knows like China is a relatively big country, so the social policy varies from region to region. But what constitutes the variation here? And I'll use the sociological word. What is the mechanism here? So that's kind of like my question. And yeah, it's kind of like few words on the background here. It's very simple. It's because first of all, the central leadership delegates substantial discretionary authority to local authorities. Because in the traditional old view, people believe that China is very, like the central state in China, the central government is very strong. But more recently, like the central state actually like not give up, like just give the powers to local authorities to make sure they can accommodate different policies according to their own cities, rather than build on a singular central framework. That's the first thing. And second thing, as many of them you may know, that there's like cadre casual evaluation system, which requires like local officials have to perform certain responsibilities in order to secure their job or in order to get a promotion. So in that scenario, local officials have to proactively design or implement certain kind of social insurance policy according to the local situation to make sure like, okay, we are doing good, we can be secured, or like the central government is happy with us so they can get promoted in the future. So that's kind of like this is the question, and those two are like a general background. And the third thing is more like kind of like my thoughts on my like contributions, even though it's a master thesis, we can not really talk about like contributions like in a dissertation sense, but that's kind of like my own thing. So the first thing is rural-urban disparity, because that is kind of very typical stuff across to the Chinese studies. So, oh, if you mention something about China, it's always, oh, rural and urban disparity. But I'm trying to demonstrate that, okay, besides rural-urban disparity, we also got like the regional competition or regional disparity, and this is something goes beyond the urban-rural like dichotomy here, which has been discussed all the time. And the second is about the central or provincial corporation, because it's again something like the common sense is like the Chinese central government is too strong and the local government has no like powers. So this paper tries to reveals that, okay, actually local government or local authorities, they do have a lot of power. So that's kind of something extra to the common sense. And the third thing is, which I just know from, not just know, which related to Professor Clark's own like ideas about amenities, because social welfare program in general it could be cover a lot of things, but here specifically into my paper, it could be like kind of like social provisions like pensions or like the minimum living standard or something like that. So it may not necessarily considered as like the services or like arts or consumptions, but it's definitely related to this concept, and we can go back to this later. And all right, so this is a very general framework. You can just look at it very briefly. So the basic idea is like the central and local government have totally different role in regards to making social policy in China. So it's very simple. You don't have to read all of them. I just like screenshots from my master's thesis. So the central level, basically the central state level is basically set up the general framework. Like, okay, we need to do this. We need to show China is stable, China economics gonna develop for the next few decades, and our regime is supposed to be stable. So that's kind of like general framework. So on this framework, the central state enacted a lot of laws or regulations, and we can see here like social insurance law and labor contract law and a lot of laws, and so most of them have been enacted after 2000 and between 2000 and 2010. So that's kind of the period. And meanwhile, to the local government, what happened here is about like the first of all, they have to follow the requirement from central government. So that's kind of the most important thing. However, because the regional differences are very obvious, so they have to accommodate their own policy to make sure, okay, we are doing good beyond just following the requirement from the central government. So central government actually, local authorities or local government actually have a lot of discretionary powers on making different social policies. And we can see they are basically all of like the schemes or like when it comes to like practice, how you gonna do that? What are you gonna do? Who gonna benefit? It pretty much depends on local authorities, and it really depends on the central government. Just a very brief table here to show you what's exactly going on. So this is like the ratio of central local revenue and expenditures here. So just one thing to show here, you can see the government expenditure here. And from like the very early period, right after the Cultural Revolution, like the central government and the local almost share like the similar percentage in terms of expanding. But when it comes to 2014, we can see here, like the local government almost be responsible to the expenditures in regards to the social welfare. However, at the same time, the revenues supposed to be relatively like the local government used to have a lot of revenues, but when it comes to more recently, the revenues has to be dramatically declined to like almost 50%. So we can say the burden is pretty much moved from the central state to the local state. It's like, you are on your own, you are doing good, but we won't take care of you anymore. So that's kind of the potential assumption here. So yeah, basically this is my two hypotheses for my thesis. So the first one is municipalities with more physical resources will give more generous and will provide more generous social insurance and pension insurances. So this is about quality. So briefly speaking, you have more money, you have better services. And the second hypothesis here is municipalities with intense interregional competition will provide broad coverage in social insurance and pension insurances. So in other words, if local officials feel they are more likely to be threatened by their neighbors or by their counterparts, they are more likely to provide more services to attract Chinese citizens to move to their place and to secure their own development as a way to compete against other local officials or local authorities. So these are like two assumptions I made in my master thesis. So this is like a measurement, what I did. So the measurement for physical revenue is very simple. First of all, it's about like how much money, like physical revenue based on the tax. So this is a very clear data. We can just basically grab it from like the governmental statistics. And the other thing is about GDP because it's about how large the local economy could be. So that's kind of like the measurement for the physical resources. And when it comes to interregional competition, it's a little bit more complicated, but I divided it into 3 parts. So the first one is about the number of the neighborhoods. So it's pretty much about like if you live in some place like Beijing or like Shanghai, to what extent or how many neighbors you have. Like in Shanghai, where you all come from, we can know there are tons of cities like Hangzhou, like Suzhou, or even like my hometown. So they're all pretty much close to Shanghai. But so that's like the first thing, like how much cities surrounded, like around, was surrounded by the surveyed localities. And the second thing I think is more important and relevant to the first thing is like the gap between the surveyed localities and their neighbors. The question is, although we may argue like Shanghai has a lot of neighbors, the question is the gap between Shanghai and its neighbors. If the gap is really huge, then it follows that those neighbors could not necessarily compete with Shanghai, and it follows that they may not be considered as a threat. They are more like they are more subordinate to Shanghai rather than they can compete with Shanghai. So this kind of gap suggests that the relations between surveyed localities and their neighbors. And the third thing is about more directly to measure the labor mobility. So it's basically like the outflow and inflow rate. So you can just see how many people go out of this province or go in this province to see whether like laborers moved out or moved in, and to see how they're gonna attract or they're gonna lose certain kind of laborers in terms of the flow of labor. Yeah, and this is my own model. Even though I'm an ethnographer and interviewer, so I'm really not into this kind of stuff, but anyway, yeah. So in terms of the models, so here it's like 3 models. So very simple. So based on 2 dimensions, one is physical resources, the other is about competition. So we can divide them into like 2+2 tables here. So the case of like Chengdu, like the southwest city in China, so it's kind of like very typical in terms of regional competition. It's supposed to suffer a lot of like, it has to compete with a lot of its neighbors. Meanwhile, it's not very like, it's kind of like 2nd tier or 3rd tier city in regards to the development of China. So it may not as strong as like these two, but it has its own framework. It's like, we may not as generous as you two, but we can try to attract more people to come to our place. Everyone is welcome. And it moves to Guangzhou. It's like the south part of China. It's very close to Hong Kong and even like Taiwan or Vietnam. So the idea is like, it's not only need to compete domestic cities. It only to compete with international cities. So the idea is like everyone is welcome. Please to join us. Meanwhile, because it's so well developed, so it has a lot of funding resources as well. So this city is very generous and inclusive. And Beijing, the 3rd model, is like kind of close to Shanghai as well. The idea is like this kind of cities, they are like most well developed in China. Meanwhile, they have a lot of capitals or powers or resources. So the idea is they don't necessarily need to compete with any other cities in China. They are doing pretty well already. So in this sense, so local residents in this kind of cities, they can enjoy a lot of benefits. But for those who come from outside of the cities but move to these cities to work, they cannot enjoy any benefits in most scenarios, which I will just show you later. And yeah, this is kind of like evidence because I did run a huge regression table, but I think if I put it here, everyone just gonna borrow. So I'm like, yeah, don't do that. But anyway, so this is just some more direct, and you can see here. So this is like very simple, like GDP here. Red is Beijing, and we can say Beijing, the red one is like highest all the time. And the only thing, the biggest neighbor in this case is like Tianjin, where Lingnan comes from, by the way. And you can say like even though Tianjin is also an important city in China, but in regards to the gap between GDP, you can see it's pretty obvious across the time. And it really makes, I think it's fair to argue like it may not compete against Beijing in most of the cases. And with all the respect, it's kind of like living under the shadow of Beijing in a way. So here. But if we look at the case of Shenzhen and Guangzhou, those two cities, they are in the same provinces in China. They are like 2 hours drive from each other. So those two cities are like very big, very important. However, if we look at their GDP, it's pretty close all the time. So the idea is those two cities, they need to compete with each other to make sure the labor will come to my own place and will contribute to my own regional development rather than go to another place. So those two cities, they also have very like inclusive yet generous welfare policy because they want to try to attract more laborers or more young people to come to their own place. And thirdly, it's more like the case which I just mentioned, like the Model Y, the Chongqing. You can see Chengdu, the blue one. And you can see compare with other cities, like the scale of economy or like scale of GDP is not as big as the rest of the cities here. But in order to develop it tries to develop this like less generous but more inclusive system. Try to attract more people will go there, even though people will not go there. And the neighbors for Chengdu is like Chongqing. It's like you can say it's doing a little bit better than Chengdu. So those two cities tries to compete against with each other. The idea is it's just a very like slice of what's going on within China because like Guangzhou, I can put like 10 cities, like 10 neighbors, but just briefly speaking to make sure like everyone has the idea.
You had a question up front here.
Oh, sorry, please.
So when you were looking at like GDP
Yes.
In the localities, were you measuring like GDP per household, like in the localities? Is that how you measured it?
Oh, that's a very good question, actually. Yeah, I did measure both. And this is like the by locality, it's like in general, but almost like per capita, like per person. And it turns to follow the similar pattern. Because even though this is huge and have a lot of more people, but because this like the number is so huge, so even you divide it by a lot of people, it still turns to be slightly higher than the rest of the city. But yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, this is like the locality. Yeah, but I didn't put the per capita or per person here. Yeah. So very briefly speaking, it's about dependent variables here. It's like what's exactly going on. So you don't have to go through all of them. Just very few simple things. First thing about money. So for Chengdu, like the subsidy for people is like $90 RMB a month, compared with like Beijing, like 280 RMB a month, and the Guangzhou is like 110. So it's pretty obvious here, like the gap is here. And meanwhile, in terms of the coverage, I think it should be. It should be here, this is data, by the way, for migrant workers. So here is like Beijing is like only for full-time. They don't give social benefits. They don't give social insurance for migrant workers. They're like, you can come to work here, but we won't cover you. Sorry, you have to go back to your own place. However, as to Chengdu and Guangzhou, they're like, welcome to join us, and we will cover your own insurance, and they will give you certain kind of benefits. So in terms of coverage, it's pretty obvious. In terms of benefits, pretty obvious. And in terms of contribution rate, and we can also see like those two cities, which they are performed really well on economics, they tend to have more generous like the benefits to the citizens compared with Chengdu, who may not perform as good as economists in this kind of scenario. Yeah. And yeah, so okay, so this is kind of like the last part. So my thoughts is like based on my thesis, I try to develop my idea like if the social welfare policy is based on the selection of local officials, it followed by that compared with the Western democratic regime, which believes that social welfare is supposed to be like human rights, supposed to be based on like the needs of human beings. In the Chinese case, it's supposed to be like the beneficiaries from from above. So it's kind of something like given from the government rather than something like based on human rights. That's the first thing. And the second thing is about the so-called the rising of local authorities, basically try to demonstrate how important local authorities are and how, in fact, how much power they could have in regards to policy-making process or decision-making process. And the third thing is like global local politics. I think it's more relevant to this class. Is like why all these cities need to like secure, like need to like develop their own economy. Because pretty much on the background is like because all the foreign capitals they like thrash into China, but they are not distributed evenly. So to what extent they want to have more resources or more capital than other cities? It pretty much depends on how competitive you could be or how attractive you could be to convince those foreigner investments to make sure, okay, they will come to my city rather than go to other places. And the last thing is very relatively new, but I just threw the point here is about, I think personally another way is called also local politics can contribute to global politics. And this is I promise this is the last slide of my presentation. Like, I think this is something very new. It's about like the One Belt, One Road stuff, which is just proposed by President Xi. The idea is like, so basically like, like in terms of Chinese history, there used to be a Silk Road or something like that. So it tries to combine all of those countries. And meanwhile, South Korea, Japan, Australia have been included meanwhile. So the idea is China tries to play a relatively active role in regards to global politics. It's not just based on its like regional economy, but it's just you can say it's across Eurasia and even to Europe. So in this case, I mean it's very new. So we don't really see a lot of like research has been done on this topic. But I guess it could be a very interesting thing to look at how local politics could contribute to global politics. And that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Any question for Tim? Yeah, I think it's a very interesting case if we're gonna think more about amenities we talk about in class. So like the entertainment machine, like trying to like allure people from all over America come to Chicago rather than to North Dakota. So we are talking about this kind of all the cultural resources that can attract people into big cities. But here we kind of have a different story, but it's kind of related to amenities, but it's more like how the government resources will help direct people from the countryside to the cities because they have better welfare provisions. And it's state centralized resources, and because it's in the authoritarian regime, so this story may be more salient compared to the story we have in the amenities and have like entertainment machine. It's not like something something like irrelevant to the state, but in China, everything is kind of related to state. So this kind of provision is like provided by local government, and they have more roles in it, and then they can attract more people through this welfare provision. So it's a good parallel to the amenities. Okay, so the third presentation we have is just kind of related to the Silk Road story Chen had in the in his last slides about the China's growing influence through the world. So the third one will be Kejing. Would you like to come in? Okay, Kejing is a visiting PhD student from Beijing, from Communication University of China, and she's gonna talk about it's a new concept in China. It's about like cultural confidence. It's more like the cultural influence, like how China could impact the world, that kind of stuff. So, would you like to get started?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm from Communication University of China, and my major is Cultural Industry Management. Now I'm a joint PhD student in sociology, and today I want to present an objective and real challenge. Xi Jinping stresses that the cultural competence is the most basic, most extensive and profound self-confidence. Currently, the cultivation and promotion of the cultural competence mainly relies on specifying the basis and resources, finding out the new trend of cultural development, as well as the spiritual and cultural demands for people. I will take this report from the following 4 parts. As first, we should clear the mailing sources of the cultural competence, then analyze it on the 3 issues exist right now and following to find out some solutions. The cultural competence mainly comes from 3 parts: the inheritance and innovation of the excellent Chinese traditional culture. It's forced on external culture as well as the innovation and creative vitality of the culture. We can say that the development and achievement of China have created the miracle for the human society since the reform and opening up policy of China for over 30 years. We had ever thought that other problems will be readily solved under the situation of developing the economic wealth. However, we have found that we were wrong. Mr. Nan Huaijing ever said, if the fundamental culture is lost, it is a terrible thing, right? Therefore, under the new social situation, we should recognize the value of the traditional culture and they bring up again the value regression issues and put forward the realizations of the value restructure of China, which will become a major social themes. The value of the cultural competence of one country is closely related to the level of its internationally cultural discourse right. The United States has a high level of cultural competence, which is mainly owing to the globalization expansion of its cultural. The cultural attraction mainly relies on the promotion of its cultural products, wherein the system full of global attraction includes the high-quality cultural products, cultural innovation mode featured with global effect, and all-around transmission network coverage, which certainly is an important content to form the cultural competence. However, the cultural discourse right in China has never reached to the level of adapting to the historical profundity and the economic development. This is mainly because the current cultural exchange mode still lies in sending out, dominated by the government. Taking the performance industry, for example, there's 2 fingers of good evidence. Many cultural exchange programs are government-sponsored, rented for the performance, and even free of charge for tickets. Moreover, audiences are Chinese. The cultural competence not only comes from the excellent traditional culture, but also comes from the cultural innovation and cultural vitality and creative vitality. From the perspective of the American cultural development experience, the stimulation mainly lies in the market. Different from many countries, America has no special government departments to manage the culture. Besides, the fine art fields are usually sponsored by the foundation, association, or public welfare, while the cultural economic fields are entirely the marketization operation, because copyright is the most basic guarantee to stimulate vitality. The main function of the government is to protect the copyright and the intellectual property. While in China, the government monopolizing the voice of the party and the ideology are the main modes and functions for a long time. The marketization reform in the cultural field since 2003 has made great achievements up to now, especially the internet vitality is a great representation. According to this white paper, this number shows that under the pressure of the economic depression, the cultural industry still keep growing in high speed, but we should also aware that there's still a big gap with the US. we're going to the second part. In this part, we will focus on these two problems. The traditional cultural resources are sufficient in China, taking the cultural heritages as examples. They are precious cultural resources and the great spiritual treasure of China, but how to make the cultural objects, stores in the palace, the intangible heritages written in the old books, alive and enter people's life, it still has many obstacles need to be solved in a creative transformation way. Firstly, solve the recognition problem. Currently, the cultural system generally thinks that the public welfare cultural units cannot engage in the cultural operation activities, or they have no difference with the operational cultural enterprises, which is a misunderstanding in recognition. The promo mainly needs to satisfy the basic demands of public cultural services, while the later take profits as the primary goal. The farmer do take the public benefits as a goal, but it is feasible to rely on the marketization mode to achieve the goal as well. The point is, profits must be returned to the society. Secondly, breaks barriers in system and mechanism. At present, the management method used in the full amount of appropriation units are adverse to provide diversified public cultural services. It means that the profits must be submitted, while the cultural units cannot benefit from it by themselves, which will cause it that many units prefer to do less or even do nothing. Therefore, this situation need to be changed. Finding out the grafting points between the owned resources of the cultural units and the social resources by means of authorization and tangible assets and trusted operation. To do so, to vitalize the resources. Now we're going to the third part. This part we have three themes like cultural sending out, selling out, and going out. The cultural sending out, dominated by the government, exactly exists with many drawbacks. Firstly, what should be sent and the number of sending tend to be determined by the superior, which are not connected with the cultural consumption demands in the local. Secondly, the cultural sending out tend to consider the number of sending without considering the result of sending. Large quantities of cultural exchange projects spend large number of funds in renting famous performance places. However, these performances are less within the report of the local mainstream media, which causes little influence and just attracts the overseas Chinese. The above problems mainly lies in the less attention to the role of the market mechanism. The reason saying that the effect of the selling out is better than sending out is that, firstly, the cultural sending out persists in the rules of equal exchange of commodities. Secondly, the cultural weight can be sold certainly based on local demands, and the cultural sending out is a cultural exchange of sustainable development. Cultural going out is the final goal. How to make it come true? Firstly, it is needed to promote the cultural capitals going out, and based on the capitals to establish the transmission channels and the platform for the culture going out. These are some examples. Wanda, Pretty Go, Star Times. Secondly, Chinese elements expressed internationally. As the commodities, cultural products are also into consideration of the acceptability In recent years, we can see that many Hollywood blockbusters invite the famous movies and the television stars from various countries, especially the Chinese stars. Besides, the scenes of the different countries are taken as background as well. This exists with many meanings, meeting with the favor of the local audiences. Finally, achieves the cooperative operation. For example, Shanghai News Publishing has promoted a collection called Culture China. In 2005, Shanghai News Publishing Development Company and the Reader's Digest Company cooperated to push this new book smoothly into the two large chain bookstores, which owned over 4,000 stores in the US, as well as some independent bookstores and online bookstores of Amazon. This can be said the mainstream sale channels in the US. As a result, the collection has been praised highly. Now we're going to part 4. The reason why America has a high cultural confidence is that the cultural enterprises and innovative subjects are leading the innovation and creation trend of the global culture. These are the 3 important issues on the supervisor's desk. Firstly, the system and the mechanism issues in the cultural management. The department separation is unhelpful to make concert efforts. Meanwhile, the function of the cultural departments are crossed, may cause a confusion. Therefore, the super ministry system is still needed to be promoted. Secondly, the cultivation issues of the cultural market suggest. Firstly, privatized cultural market subjects are small, weak, and dispersed, and the international cultural industry group are insufficient. Secondly, the state-owned cultural enterprises lack of vitality. According to the statistics, up to the end of the 2014, these are some figures to show the Chinese phenomenon. In addition, most state-owned cultural enterprises conduct mergers and reconstructions under the administrative power instead of taking the assets and the property right as bound. So, establishing modern enterprises system is an important method. Third, the efficiency promotion issues of the public cultural services. There exist many problems here. In the future, the public cultural services construction not only needs to stress its original features, but also should stress its modernity more. Therefore, bring in the social power to supply the public cultural services contents and forming the contract relationship between the government and the public supplier is urgent. There are some simple conclusions and suggestions here. Yes, thanks for listening.
Can you take us back to that last slide? I just didn't get to read through it.
Questions?
Can I ask a question here? What's the differences between like cultural competence and so-called soft power in your presentation? I don't know whether you have heard about like the notion of soft power. Like
Self-power?
Soft
power.
Soft power.
Yeah. Because it seems to me it's pretty similar, and personally I don't like see like big differences between these two concepts, because what you have mentioned about America is pretty much about the soft power, like their cultural products or cultural consumptions, which also applies to China. So in that scenario, how it can be different from like so-called cultural competence in your case?
English, maybe I have a little bit problems in English, so I would like to ask a TA to help me to answer these questions. Or maybe you can, I think, maybe we can have a discussion after
Oh, sure.
class.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting to see like this seen from a different perspective from sociology. And finally, it's my own turn.
Hey.
Yeah. Hope it's not so boring for you. I have some videos, so it won't be so boring. Okay. So another exercise about how like applying what we learn in the class and how to apply to a different field and to see what's different from what we learn in American context and from context in China. And this time it comes to the social movement. And maybe you can keep the McCarthy, the Zard party in mind and think about the mobilization structure, the political opportunity, and also the framing. So these are the three pillars of the social movement as we just discussed in the Laura session. So I'm trying to say more about that and how a political structure, this thing would make a difference in two social movements. So it's basically a comparison of environmental movement. It's like anti-certain chemical in Xiamen, a coastal city in China, smaller, and Shanghai, a metropolitan city. So a little bit background information. It's like, so different from Mao's area, different from the totalitarian area, we kind of have more social movement, mass movement emerging in the post-socialist China. People have more power, they are more willing to participate in social movement, and government is just like they're punishing a mechanism, or they're like this kind of repressive mechanism, they're getting a little bit better. So it's like it becomes less harsh. So there's create opportunities for mass movements. And as we discussed in the new social movement, so as we also see in China, what we see in America, we have movement concerns shifting from something like labor union thing, labor contest or labor contract negotiation to the lifestyle. We care more about our living standard, or we care about the environment, like Chinese people enjoying. So the question is, in the post-socialist area, but still it's authoritarian regime, so it's still a one-party domination situation. So how to approach environmental protest in contemporary authoritarian context, and what can explain the different paths of social movements? So this is the case. I don't know, I know how to pronounce this word. I think it's paraxylene, I guess.
That sounds right.
Yeah. So it's something like people are protesting again. It's like the crucial raw materials for chemical industry, and annual demand for it is about 37 million tons worldwide. So most of them are like produced by China through the chemistry plants. So these kind of chemicals, the paraxylene, has a detrimental but rather chronic effect on human health, particularly like skin, eyes, digestive, inhalation, and reproductive system. It can cause problem to people, but it's kind of slow. So you get this kind of problem before you be aware of it. So later, Chinese people find it's kind of an issue. And this is a typical paraxylene PX plant. What we have is generally look like this. And some more background information. So this kind of PX plant was introduced to localities in China by local government as a measure to boost the local GDP, as Chen just mentioned. So it's like local government have different strategies trying to boost their own GDPs or recruit talent from all over the country. So in this case, they just want to boost their GDP by like introducing this kind of harmful but lucrative factories. And this kind of creates significant health concern and it motivated people in different regions to protest against it. So we have, this case I'm going to talk about Xiamen in 2007, we have Chengdu in 2008, Dalian in 2011, northeast part of China, Kunming, southeast part of China, 2013, Maoming in the Guangdong area close to Hong Kong in 2014, and we have somewhere in Shanghai in 2015. So it's basically all over the country. Whenever they are trying to build a PX factory, people are trying to protest against it. And I'm just trying to show you a little video about what's happening in a case I'm not going to talk about. It's the Maoming 2014 case. It's a relatively small municipality in Guangdong province, close to Hong Kong. But in 2014, when the government wanted to implement this PX plant, there's tens of thousands of local residents protest against the building of this new PX plant. And the demonstration eventually evolved into violence, and government has kind of like harsh repression against the movement. And through some there's also some internet censorship, so you can see the repression going on and the power of the civil society going up. And finally, it kind of caused some injuries and probably deaths, but we don't really know about that. It's like people have different information sources and it's not confirmed, but it's believed there is like casualties. So let's get a sense of this through this news report. Oops. Yes, it's muted.
Oh, okay. No, it's actually this one.
You guys having trouble with audio?
Maybe.
You gotta plug that cable in.
Oh.
Province.
Oh.
Peroxidine is mainly used as a feed. Yesterday, in our hot comment section here on China Take, we touched on the protest on Sunday against a peroxidine or PX project in the city of Maoming, which is in the Guangdong province. Peroxidine is mainly used as a feedstock for manufacturing purified terephthalic acid, or PTA, which is an important chemical in the production of fiber and plastic bottles. Many people in China, however, believe it's extremely harmful to the environment and to living organisms in general. As a result, thousands of local residents protested against the PX project, calling to move it to the outside city's downtown area. Most of the Chinese media organizations, though, remained silent over the protest, while, in stark contrast, Weibo, one of China's most influential social media platforms, has become many people's first choice for updates. Lots of pictures have been posted on the forum, some of which were then deleted. The Maoming government criticized posted on the forum, some of which were then deleted. The Maoming government criticized some
problem of
Try refreshing it.
I will.
Yesterday, in our hot comment section, pictures have been posted on the forum, some of which were then deleted. The Maoming government criticized some.
No, it's the video then.
The first time that Chinese people have demonstrated against PX projects, though. Similar cases have also previously happened in Dalian, Ningbo, and Kunming. Now, to hear more about the thoughts of Chinese internet users, let's go to our newsroom where Esther Dong will provide us a clearer picture of how people in China view the situation. Hello, Esther. First off, let's begin with the protest itself. How are net users reacting to that?
Yes, based on the comments I've seen, the majority of people are expressing their understanding and support for the protesters. First, have a listen to this Guangdong-based commenter who says on CNET.cn. There are already many oil refinery plants and ethylene factories there, and the oil refinery plants are very close to the government building. 90% of residents there suffer from rhinitis. They are fed up with these chemical factories. Of course, they will protest when hearing about the PX project. And this poster, DZ Rong on Weibo.com says, who would trouble themselves by protesting if there was nothing serious? The Maoming government always decides everything all by itself, regardless of the thoughts or input of the people. Look at the consequences of the factories there on the local environment. How can the residents there believe the government can manage the PX project well? People just want to live in an environment that they don't have to worry about sickness or death on a daily basis.
As mentioned earlier, the whole issue has been circulating on Weibo, while the Chinese media has not paid much attention to it. What are the reactions to that?
Well, yes, you are right about the circulation on Weibo, but even there, information on the whole issue hasn't been that easy to search for. Actually, Maoming PX has been considered a sensitive word search on the forum. Lots of search results have been blocked by the government. That in turn has understandably drawn lots of anger. This poster named Elshan J on Weibo.com being one of them. See, the protest happened in Maoming and even caused the conflicts between police and the protesters. But our media remained silent, and even posts on online forums have been censored. I have to say the Maoming government is too powerful.
Okay, so let's start from there. So you can see the strategy. Whenever they have some disapproval or the people express their own ideas on the social network, the only way the government can do is just block them and censor everything from them. That's their basic strategy. And just use that keywords and just to distill everything through that censorship mechanism. Okay. So.
Wait, can I ask a question about that?
Go ahead.
Are there any sort of like counterinsurgencies of a development of a whole other type of code language around a particular issue to get around that kind of censorship?
Mm-hmm.
You know, do people come up with a new, you know, it's essentially like rebranding a topic, like you know, code word, like you're talking about puppies, but you're actually still talking about this chemical.
It's like memes, right? So it's like they use certain words to denote other words.
Yeah.
But in this way, the mobilization power will kind of decline a little bit because people are trying to play with the
lag
word.
time in establishing a shared understanding of whatever the new term is?
I think it's kind of lacking because they don't have a centralized like system to let everyone know what's this word means. I mean, because it's like have a little bit substitution, but people get confused sometimes. Only part of people knows, but without something like Twitter, people that just get confused, and they don't have mass media to spread their ideas. So it's all everything localized and fragmented. So that's maybe the problem. Okay. So basically, my case is kind of different from Maoming, but it's kind of similar in a way because also the anti-PX movement. So in Xiamen 2007, there's local protests against PX program, and eventually they succeeded. But in Shanghai 2015, similar story. Residents' demonstration against another government-led PX refinery construction project, but the movement failed. So what's the divergent in outcome? Oh, so just a mapping thing going on. Shanghai is like eastern coast of China, and here is Japan, and this is Taiwan. And Xiamen is very close to Taiwan, and Hong Kong is here. So coastal cities, Shanghai larger, Xiamen a little bit smaller, but the view is better because it's like tourism city. So people are trying to also protest against because they kind of treasure the environment there. So they both occur in highly developed coastal regions. And when we think about the mobilization structures, they are kind of similar in McAdams' terms. So they both have tens of thousands involved. They have street demonstration, and you can see there's kind of internet activism going on, just like we just saw in the Maoming's case. People said on Weibo and then got censored. And if we talk about frame bridging, there's also something going there. They are trying to connect this environment concern to issue of social justice on the Communist Party. So they trying to talk about Mao a lot, the old political giant of China. They said during that Maoism era, people have social justice, there's perfect social equality. So why can't we go back to that time? So in terms of this issue, we need justice here. So they are trying to, both of movements are trying to do this frame bridging, social environment movement concerns and the Maoism social justice concern, linking between the two to like legitimize their own agenda. But still, despite similarities, why divergence? So this is like a photo on the internet about the protest in Xiamen. So banners, people on the streets. It's like what we see in China's environmental protest. And this is a photo I took in 2015 in Shanghai. So it's kind of my hometown. My hometown kind of near to this chemistry plant. So I lived there for like 22 years, and then I came to the States. So that's where I lived before I came here. So people demonstrate there. So similar. We have banners, we have people on the street, street violence a little bit, and government repression a little bit. But why this one fails, and in the case of Xiamen, they win. So this project involved a little bit like archival study for both cases, government documents, domestic and foreign media coverage, and also a little bit ethnography for Shanghai's case, a little bit observation and interviews of demonstrator, and later we will see the officials a little bit. So what's the difference here? So I think I want to tell a political opportunity structure story here. So we talked about in the political opportunity literature is that an elite alliance that can make a difference for social movement. But can we really see this in an authoritarian regime? So I'm trying to ground this elite alliance in the authoritarian regime. So what we see on elite alliance, on the one hand, we can see the state authorized experts and university professors carrying protest interests in both cases. So there was professors and those chemistry experts within the government and within the university, which kind of show sympathy for the protest, and they want to do something for it in both cases. But the success of movement depends on whether they find the other side of allies, where they find an effective allies who also sympathize with the protest interests, but because they also have arbitrary power in political decision making in terms of PX projects. So they need to find an ally who kind of show sympathize with the protest also, and have the decisive decision-making power in saying, oh, we can just stop that, or we can continue it. So they have a say in the political system. So if we have both of the conditions, so there's a societal embeddedness, that's what I call it. So both conditions should be met. So who can be effective allies in the authoritarian regime government systems? So there's a continuum of the arbitrary power in influencing the chemical plant construction. So who can stop that project within the government? So local government and the Central Ministry of Environmental Protections, they have this agency have a high alignment with the protest because it's Environmental Protection Ministry, but they have a low say in the arbitrary power, like in influencing the chemical plant construction. They don't have a definite say in saying, okay, I can just stop that. And so does the local governments. They don't have a say, and their interest alignment with protests is low because they care about GDP, right, as I just said. So this one is not efficient and effective. This one is not effective. And we have a National Development and Reform Committee, which is powerful in decision making to stop the project, but they don't have interest alignment with the protest. Also, this agency also care about GDP. So they can stop it, but they just won't do that. the problem is to find someone here, but it's kind of difficult. But the dilemma is that no government agency in routine decision-making apparatus could be effective allies. But what we see in Xiamen's case is that they successfully connect with the State Council, which is the highest administrative organization in China, through the National People's Congress annual meeting. So every year they just gather and bring proposal to the central leadership, to this agency. And as in the Xiamen's case, the professors, the experts, they successfully delivering their own claims to this state council through this Congress. And the central leadership said, okay, that's fair, I can accept it, because they see it eventually and they accept it. But in the Shanghai's case, experts only gain the favor of Ministry of Environmental Protection, this agency, but it's not totally useful because they don't have a say in the influencing the chemical plant construction or removal of it. So it's kind of an accident, but in Xiamen's case, they did find an ally here, which is the State Council, so which kind of bring the story, make the story work for the Xiamen's case. So again, we're trying to revisit the theory. So what would lead to a successful protest in authoritarian regime? We also have political structure arguments that might work, and framing and discourse deployment, as we just said it could be possible. But my case shows that if it comes to the political opportunities, so the problem here is not only emphasizing the efforts of civil society to connect with the state to seek political opportunities, but which state agency would be effective in resolving political claims. That also matters in the authoritarian case, because we see a hierarchy of bureaucratic institutions in China, and which one really does matter is still a question. So if they can find the state elite within the government agencies through the hierarchy, and then the political opportunities is gained, and the movement could be successful if we control for the political mobilization structure and frame and discourse. And yeah, that's it. So.
Okay, so thank you for our Chinese presenters. That's really nice. Okay. Professor, do you want to say something quickly?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't have any obvious comments. I guess what's excellent is the documentation, the case studies which we have. I sense one direction which is close to trying to either generalize and interpret why are there differences is a good way to move toward more generalizations and to link with broader discussions and to say where and why is China different. And we may have a description, for instance, that some cities opposed the PX and others did not, but that's, in a sense, that's characteristic of the way the environmental literature was just before the papers were, which we read in the course. That is, the main point of the papers was to try to say, why are there so many differences from one study to another? And their answer was, of course, framing and the other variables which were introduced. So I would say maybe a little, and clearly most of you have something like that somehow in mind. That is, you're not just giving a journalistic account, you're trying to generalize, but I would say maybe trying to articulate that a little bit more than each of you did would be a good step. I mean, the big themes you're mentioning is obviously the strong state censorship, so forth, but why does it vary so much from place to place? And especially within China. So within China, variations are probably a very good, potentially powerful way of interpreting things instead of getting into the potentially ideological labels. You know, is it too authoritarian or is it just censorship? But you got variation. Jean Lin, I'll just mention, was a TA in this course and a couple of other courses with me for several years while she initially was a journalist covering environmental conflicts in China on the mainland. And then she did her PhD on it after maybe 4 or 5 years of being a journalist. So she really knew these things well. And she had the same basic problems. And she used case study material. She used some national general social survey data, which is also available by local region. That is, you can't compare all the Chinese cities, but there are enough cases in some of these surveys that you can compare at least 4, 5, 6 of the biggest Chinese cities. They're named, and the respondents can be then compared. And a first hypothesis is, you know, people are different as individuals, and it's not really a city difference. It's the composition of the citizens, and that's a way of at least to try to address that. So, again, all helpful, all creative, all important additions to an international, global body of knowledge, and the environment is certainly one of the most important issues still in the world, and it's likely to get even more important. And it's particularly acute in China. No one really mentioned sort of things that some foreigners talk about. When people will say, I've just been in Beijing and I went up an elevator and I just looked at the light at the top of the elevator and there was green gas in the whole elevator. That is, people tell stories like that of the huge amount of pollution, air pollution, water pollution. And for years, the national government basically ignored it and said we want economic growth, but that is totally reversed. And now, with the Trump administration is doing the opposite of what China is doing. China has become a major global leader in favoring the environment. So in that sense, the sort of pro-economic growth versus the environment is not a proper or sufficient sort of interpretation. Plus, different positions by the ministries and different participants. Okay.
Okay, Professor.
I'll stop.
We are 5 minutes past. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Lara, I have what?
You what?
One word, real quick. I have something to ask you.